Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast. Today we have Diego Hoter, co-founder and CEO of ucrop.it. Ucrop.it is a collaborative platform for farmers and companies to agree, trace, verify, and share sustainable crop stories at a farm level in a profitable, digital, and scalable and immutable way. They eliminate greenwashing and climate metrics. Diego, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I'm so excited to chat with you. I love hearing companies that are working in the sustainability space. It seems that there's just a lot of inefficiencies in what we're doing, a fundamental level and infrastructural level that companies like yourself, are working on kind of reducing the waste and the cost and things along that nature, and also the metrics and what we're receiving and seeing. So all in all, really excited to chat with you. Tell me a little bit about what you were doing before you started ucrop.it.
Right. First, thank you, Julian, for inviting me, having me here. I'm excited about discussing these topics with you. And to answer your question, before I used to work for a agriculture industry for over a decade, more or less. Was in Monsanto, bringing biotechnologies from a marketing regional role into the South American market, biotechnologies in crops.
Yeah. And what was that like, especially from, I think both the American and South American, we have different industries and how they're set up, but I'm curious because a lot of the supply from South America also influences other countries. Tell us a little bit about the mechanics behind, growing crops and distributing them and what is necessary for the high production that is needed.
Yeah, so basically 11,000 years ago, since wheat was brought into the agriculture industry as the first extensive row crop to be produced in volume, right? The world has only one need. It was to feed an increasing hunger population, right? But
Yeah.
that paradigm is kind of shifting as we speak because nowadays the agricultural function not only has to feed an increasing hunger population, but also help to cool down the overall world's temperature. And the agriculture industry is responsible for about one fourth of global greenhouse emissions, and that is happening mainly 90% of that from the seed to the harvest, right? So,
Yeah.
food key countries such as the US, Brazil, Argentina, and the farmers within these countries, of course, Europe, Africa, and in Asia, we all have a key role in playing this down, right? In
Yeah.
helping ensure that farming is done in a sustainable way to reduce the carbon footprint, but also to ensure an environmental footprint as we produce crops and fiber to feed the world, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And how do these countries communicate? What are the means that they use to communicate now? And how effective is that communication between, the countries and the farmers? And because it seems like there's a lot of people involved in the process.
Yeah, well, so yes, you're right. The value chain has several actors. You have the traders that
Yeah.
source crops from the farmers. You have input companies selling fertilizers and input products to those farmers. You have financial services. You have machinery companies. Nowadays, you have carbon entities trying to help farmers monetize their carbon footprint. So overall, there's a lot of players within the value chain, right? You have the elevators, the farmers themselves. They're a collective entity. You have the farmer that it owns the land, but then you have
Yeah.
the farmers that actually rent the land, and you have the people that work for these farmers in producing the crops as crops responsibles at the field. They are agronomists, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
there are a lot of people involved in the process of coming up with a relevant grain, right? A commodity crop.
Oh, I was gonna ask a question about, you crop it. There was this piece about greenwashing metrics and where I'm curious in the process of, the entire from farm to table, I guess, chain of events. What is this whole greenwashing and climate metrics? Is this part of the emissions that people are omitting from their reports? Or, I assume that what you said, there's a lot of waste that's involved in, the agricultural process and you have to report that. Was this greenwashing that you speak of?
Yeah, so basically, in order to be in a time where companies, right, corporates, companies, big companies are trying to honor, big and medium-sized companies are trying to honor their sustainable farming footprints, right? They have to make
Yeah.
sure that what happens at farm level in farming those crops is the correct way, right? It's environmentally positive. But you wouldn't get that from seeing, I know, a soybean or a bean or a corn. Out of that, you wouldn't get to see how that crop was being brought to
Yeah.
existence, right? Because Basically, if you get a soybean, right, that it's been farmed in non-sustainable landscape because it has been all deforested for in order to produce that, and basically applying a lot of fertilizers or dietary products that are way above of the green threshold of appliances, or basically with child laboring involved and basically releasing a lot of carbon into the air, right?
Yeah.
Or with a low environmental footprint adequate to that production, it will look exactly the same as a soybean that has been produced taking care of these things, right? On a sustainable, verified landscape by applying no-till labor, actually reducing the level of emissions in when you see the crop with childless labor verified involved in the production process, and basically using a responsible way fertilizers and agrochemicals, right, phytosanitary products, in order to bring peace of mind to the consumers of those crops. Those beans will look exactly the same. So how do you get to know which one was verified for an environmental impact from the other one? And that is what we actually do, right? We apply technology that we combine from geospatial satellite images along with farm track record data in the hands of the farmers, or with oracles from the interfaces they use out of John Deere machinery, or interfaces such as farm tools such as the field view farm tool and others that enable us to retrieve data from those machines. Combine that with the satellite images and geolocalized pictures that the growers that are entitled to legally exploit that land can provide us evidence on the way they are not only using the land, because we run an automated algorithm in order to understand how sustainable that landscape is in the very first place, but also to the fact to be able to qualify the sustainable practices along the crop cycle as it unfolds. And we produce out of that what we call a forest story or a crop story, depending if that is on a forest asset or on a cropland production use of land. We create these crop stories that basically enable the farmers to tell on a verified manner the sustainable story of their crops to many companies involved within the value chain.
Yeah. And what's the incentive for farms to adopt this technology and to keep track of the stories so detailed to the fact that they know that not only the impact, but throughout the process, where that impact can be improved? What's the incentive for these farmers?
Well, so farmers for us, they are free users of our platform. And as a customers, we have these big companies. We have 25 multinational companies that goes from the trader houses to CPG companies to banks and to input providers that are looking forward to engaging in this with these farmers to basically agree, trace, and verify these crop stories at farm level on the basis of the protocols they need to trace in order to comply with either their sustainability policies or a business objective. For example, we have trader houses such as Cargill, amongst others, that wants to source sustainable soybeans or sustainable corn out of specific international rural sustainability standards in the use of land where the farmers are producing these crops. So we verify that for them. We produce a sustainable landscape report that verifies the sustainable origin for this crop that they ultimately will source out of these farmers with those crop stories. Or we have fertilizer companies that wants to engage in the way farmers are applying that product, not to overdose fields, to verify that they are using it in a responsible manner, to basically reduce the environmental impact of those fertilizers, of those crop protection products at farm level. And all these companies will reward those farmers once they achieve these verified objectives within their crop stories, and for sharing those crop stories with them, for these companies to be able to impact their brands, their products, or their process with that traceable information to who, where, how, and what these farmers have achieved those sustainable metrics, so that you can have a sense and a grip on how those metrics that you will basically bring into a product or a process, for example, the carbon footprint, cannot be challenged out of being false, for example, because you can actually trace back to whom, where, how, and when that footprint was sequestered in the first place.
Yeah. What was, you've been in agriculture for most of your career, if not all. What inspired you to ucrop it and kind of take, this idea of tracking and really take it to another level and offer this really intelligent way to keep track of this, crop, this whole process?
That's a great question. Thank you, Julian. So when I was working for Monsanto, I was in charge of bringing biotechnologies into the fields for companies and farmers to leverage on the power of having more yield or better crop protection traits out of those crops. But ultimately, this would require an understanding, right, between the farmers and the companies that they engage with, for example, the trading houses. And I was able to spot a gap there, right? What was good for both was not perhaps the best timing or the best objectives in order to unfold those technologies, because if it would increase the yield, ultimately they will think that as a trader house will ultimately recognize that as positive because they will have more grain in order to export, but that was not the case because traders think on a silo way and farmers think on a silo way, and they do all their short-term incentives are meant for basically maximizing that crop, specific crop season value. And with these things, as with sustainability, it's more about the long-term value that you are creating. But back then I thought that this would be solved by getting them into a commitment on how they could agree a specific objective that will fulfill both interests on a profitable manner, but that they can actually pursue it on a long-term basis, right?
Yeah.
And so by that time I was researching on blockchain. That was around 20. I realized that blockchain could create a decentralized way of tracing crops with enough information to sustain specific objectives that will fit both farmers and companies' interests, and in doing so, create an immutable truth that everybody could agree on one thing that has been solved at farm level that will be able to be capitalized by the company that is engaging with those farmers. So then this was the basis of a paper I wrote in 2016, and that then I kind of published 2019. And since 2018, and since 2019, we started the company in order to make this a real thing, right?
Yeah. Early on, what was some of the main challenges you faced having using a new really hypothesis thesis around tracking information for crops in particular, and then having it adopted to both farmers and corporations? Was there a challenge getting them on board, and how was the building process? Did you build in a very simplistic, kind of understandable model that they could already implement, or did you have to onboard and have them adopt a new way of using technology? What was that process and challenges like?
So that's a good question as well. So back then, that paper looks like science fiction to everyone that we were showcasing this, because it was like blockchain farming, right? Which was you have to set your mind in 2016. It was really new, right? And no one actually knew what was blockchain about. And people were hearing about Bitcoin, but not about the underlying technology beneath. And we were even applying that to the agricultural industry, which is a industry that somewhat lags behind technology, right? So back then it was really like science fiction, but we were able to expose that to some pre-seed investors of us that were very knowledgeable and proficient in the agricultural industry. And though they did not grasp what the technology was about, they did grasp what the objective what we were pursuing was about. And they were seeing the challenge of a differentiated crop based on information at a massive scale that cannot be done by basically sending a bunch of people at the farm and checking lists or checkbox on a paper and trying to give a faith and truth certainty out of that, but that you have to basically digitalize that without losing remote certainty in the hands of the farmers. So, but with that technology, the blockchain, you could actually do that at a really competitive price. So when we built the business case, we were able to gather the funds out of these pre-seed investors in order to bootstrap our solution for almost 2 years, because we released this by the end of 2020, which was our very first MVP. And we got the awareness of two companies that betted on us, which was Gensus, one of the largest cotton seed companies in Latin America, and Indigo Agriculture back then, in order to trace crops by applying blockchain recorded crop stories. And since then, and it was 2020, we have, in the last 2 years, 21 and 2022, we have grown from 50,000 hectares, that is somewhat between 150,000 acres, right? And a bunch of 12 farmers. We have grown into tracing 2.2 million acres of climate verified crops all across, down from the United States, all across to Latin America, South. We are spanning from the United States, Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay. And we have operations all across those countries, tracing these crops across wheat, soybeans, cotton, corn, forestry, and a bunch of others, in order to provide this engagement with farmers and crop stories. And back in by the beginning of 2021, we were able to materialize our first round, right? And engage professional VC investors from New York, from the United States and Latin America that were either anchored in sustainability or big agriculture funds. and we were able to lead our round and support us with their capital until today that we are still growing, right?
Yeah, that's incredible. And what was the process like kind of distributing your technology across other countries? Was there a lot of red tape that you had to go through? Is it fairly free in terms of the relationships you were building with other companies and farmers, or what were I'm assuming there had to have been hurdles,
Yeah.
selling into other location, other countries.
So, as I told you, farmers for us is a free user, and
Yeah.
our real customers, the one that pay our service fee, are companies that are looking forward to engage with these farmers in order to agree on a specific objective to be addressed at farm level and build their crop stories that will resemble and achieve those objectives and share that information on a peer-to-peer basis within a crypto confidential environment between those farmers and that company for these companies to impact products and processes with these verified metrics, right? So once we got our first contracts, we kept growing on these contracts. Nowadays, we support more than 25 multinationals on this effort, and these same companies began asking us to go to other geographies, right? And so, in doing so, they began helping us expand our way because we do have agronomists at the field supporting farmers on each geography that we operate on how to digitize these crop stories in order for these farmers to receive incentives that these companies are willing to reward them on a monetary basis for sharing, for verifying, accomplishing, and sharing these crop stories. Is that we were able to bring to the farmer a very compelling value proposal, free to use. You get paid for your stability now, not tomorrow, and you get to share how you do things on a correct manner with companies that are willing to price that for you and that value that way of farming. So this was about changing the grower's mindset into a more sustainable mindset grower, but also in doing so, building a profitable business model for farmers and companies to be able to profit about it. And so because of that, I think that we were able to, through our customers, reach other geographies and expand through our business model that is assisted on farm with farmers that are willing to engage in such a model, right?
Describing more about the blockchain technology bit, did you mint your own coin? Did you create your own protocol, or did you use some pre-existing EVM machine or EVM to create smart contracts out of ETH? What were you doing exactly tell us a little bit more about the blockchain technology about that. Are you creating smart contracts to track everything, or what is it that makes
Yeah,
ucrop.it
so
unique?
we what we use blockchain is for immutability traceability, right? So you can argue basically that we are creating the largest agricultural NFT, right? Because what happens when a plot of land vanishes each crop season after each crop season. So the way you
Right.
farm a crop is relevant to be able from one crop season to the other one because it can be a totally different crop and a totally different way to farm that from the use of land perspective up to what practices you actually apply to that. So in applying blockchain to that and through different sidechains that we use in order to record that in public blockchains to create immutability, traceability on those specific blocks through those caches, is that we were able to produce a crop story that would be immutably recorded and decentralized, but have the crypto confidential level that farmers will rely on in order to be the ones to decide which company to share that information to. So we build this data layer on top of that that helps create these agreements through which farmers, once a company, a corporate company, the customer of us publishes a traceability protocol on our platform, they get growers which are already verified for legal rights to exploit the land to basically adhere to that traceability protocol. And once that happens, that creates for each company an crypto confidential blockchain space out of which those crop stories will be shared. But one company cannot see the other company crop story because each of them is a crypto confidential environment. But a farmer can see as many protocols are there for him to adhere, so he can basically share many crop stories with many companies for different climate purposes to trace with and earn incentives out from them. So currently, on average, farmers are sharing 5 crop stories with 5 different companies on a single acre of land for 5 different purposes and earning incentives out of each crop, but relating on a particular way with each of these companies for those companies to be able to leverage those crop stories on their products and brands. And that is basically our gravy sauce. Using blockchain for that immutability recording and the centralization on the farmer hands for providing the correct evidence on how they are doing things that can be immutably recorded without sacrificing remote certainty, so that you can become this scalable on a digital and global basis.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear what you're working on and how you're enabling farmers because, it was one of the biggest things in America, at least, was the advent of subsidies for farmers who were struggling, but they could have, financial backing from the government to be able to produce something that was incentivized for them to do so. And we've seen that play out, and it was great at the time, but now there's a lot of immobility to change, what we're growing and how we're doing it in a way that it's not necessarily as advantageous as it used to be, but using this, blockchain technology in a way that essentially validates how well your crops do and perform and your process behind it. I think is really tapping into a lot of what consumers want, which is where's my stuff coming from? How was it treated during the growing process? What was involved in the chemicals, or I'm assuming the land and its distribution, the climate, when it was harvested, all these pieces of information that I think, as at least as me as a consumer, I want to know because I think people are becoming more in tune to what we intake after huge industrialization, global push for feeding a large population. But the population now, I think, wants more information to what you're consuming. What's the Carl Sagan story behind You Crop It? You added that into the notes, and I'm so fascinated to
Yeah.
hear, and I would love for you to share that.
Yeah, so I told you how difficult it was for our pre-seed investors to grasp the technology side of it.
Yeah,
So I came along with this rough PPT explaining how through blockchain farming we could solve this problem of crop traceability for impact purposes between farmers and companies within the value chain, and explaining how this would be a trend for the next 5 years. That actually, now looking back for almost 3 4 years behind, we are seeing this sustainability trend kicking mainstream on all big forests and crops assets across the world, and they just didn't get it. I mean, they like, blockchain what? So these. So and these were people that were really in the agricultural business. We are talking about people
yeah,
that were the owners of big agricultural management operations, and that were either global executives of big agricultural firms, and were not able to grasp the concept
yeah,
of technology. So I choose to say, okay, let Carl Sagan explain this to you, and I put this great video that Carl Sagan has on the fourth dimension in YouTube.
yeah, yeah.
You can Google Sagan explaining to you the fourth dimension, but because you cannot actually understand what the fourth dimension is because we cannot see it, he does a great job of explaining how the fourth dimension should be understood by explaining the difference between the two dimensions and the three dimensions that we actually understand, because we actually can see the two dimensions and we live in the three dimensions. I showcased that video to him, and I said, okay, you know what? You are living in 3D agriculture, and this is all about 4D agriculture. And they went like bombastic. Say, yeah, we want to. So please, yeah, make a piece of that. We do not understand it, but we get the total sense of the objective that you are following. And yeah, we want to be a part of that.
Incredible.
So Carl Sagan has a great place in ucrop for all of us.
I love that. I love how the use of any explanatory tool like a video or a graph or anything used from prior experiences. And it's amazing to see that you were able to take that and use it for You Crop It. And it's such a funny
So
story.
it wasn't even agriculture. It wasn't even about blockchain and not.
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
about the fourth dimension, right? But
yeah,
it was pretty much the way it was felt back then,
yeah,
right? Because
yeah.
we didn't even know what blockchain was.
Yeah, yeah. And now it's evolved into so much more. And as the technology of blockchain is evolving, is the technology behind You Crop It evolving as well? Or how do you kind of, there's a lot of regulations, there's just a lot of impact with blockchain technology. Has that impacted you, or is it less impactful because it's more used for the mechanics of the platform or the
Right.
technology
So
that you're building?
So I think that the overall regulations and the scrutiny comes with the tokenization of crypto
Yeah,
assets mainly, right? Well, we are not actually doing that,
yeah,
right? What we're actually doing is providing an understanding on, see the difference of this. If you had a farm data, right, stored in a public database,
mhm,
right, which was not endorsed by a farmer with an electronic signature, a token that actually endorsed the way that piece of data was manufactured, for applying a specific product with an environmental impact coefficient, for running a low-till labor experience when you sit in the seats, for accounting on how sustainable your landscape is, that you are entitled to legally exploit that, and that is not endorsed, right? It's only a
yeah,
data on a public database that can be manipulated, and it's not traced back to whom which was responsible for actually bringing that data in the very first place. We solve for all of that while we structure our crop story from the use of land to the crop cycles activities as they unfold in order to be able to feed with that data climate metrics such as the carbon footprint, the environmental impact coefficients on the way you responsibly apply fertilizers and crop protection products, the responsible way that you will not impact wetlands with your fertilizers, not to produce other more pollutant gases than the CO2, or the way you're taking care of biodiversity within your agricultural asset, are all things that we can build out in the crop stories and get blockchain recorded with the farmer's endorsement and the evidence of that realization. So in doing such a thing, we are not actually creating a crypto asset. We are recording that information in blockchain to brought up a crop story that of course is non-fungible and is immediately recorded to be shared between those farmers. But for the overall intent to reward those growers out of sharing, that and there is a difference out of producing a token that will have a whatever market value there that will fluctuate and I don't know. We didn't came from that angle. We came from the immutability angle, and in doing so, what we are doing as we grow as a platform and as we span through different markets within America and non-American markets, is create a secure Web3 environment in which you can actually raise the level of transaction and incentive programs rewarding farmers about their sustainability intents. Because there's a huge carbon tunnel vision nowadays, but it's not only about carbon, right? It's about how you're taking care of biodiversity. It's about how you are farming and with an positive environmental impact coefficient on the way you use fertilizers and crop protection products. It's about how you treat endangered species. It's about how you use your land on a consistent basis, not to contribute to the deforestation or to to broader negative impacts in the moment that we are trying all to reduce that sources of greenhouse emissions, right? So that is our angle, and that is how we are building it forward.
Yeah. What are some of the biggest challenges that ucrop.it faces today?
So I would say that we are growing fast, and that nowadays the timing is correct because we are having a lot of commercial activity and companies that we're growing a lot of companies contracts, and we're growing in farmers, right? And in engaging those together, we're growing in revenue, right? We were able to monetize roughly $1 million out of this. The previous one, 2021, was about $215,000, and the 2021 was about only $50,000. So we are growing exponentially in terms of monetizing our crop stories with farmers and companies alike. But I would say that our overall challenges now relies on, as the world finds and organizes itself in order to reward sustainability, to keep our growth pace and our correct funding matching that, so that we can get to the sweet spot on which once the world has organized its framework to reward farmers based on this, and as frameworks for sustainability becomes more rigid in terms of how agriculture should be produced, we are the ones being able to leverage the intent with a platform that is as intuitive and scalable for farmers and companies to make their sustainability efforts profitable today.
Yeah. If everything goes well, what's the long-term vision for ucrop.it?
Well, we do want to become the fabric for global digital agriculture, right? For sustainability basis. So if we could provide that level of digitalization to companies and farmers that are looking to produce on a more sustainable basis, on a verified way, with no greenwashing risk in the middle of the processes, we will be very successful in attempting what we wanted to do in the very first place. So to become the global sustainability, the fabric of global digital agriculture for sustainability purposes, for verified sustainability purposes.
Love that. Yeah. I always like to ask this question for my audience, but also for selfish research purposes. What is a book or books or people who have influenced you the most, whether it was early in your career or currently now?
Well, so I had the chance to meet one. You know, Scott Stornetta, he's renowned as on a world basis as the father of blockchain. Right? He's the guy that actually came with the blockchain protocol 1991 out of the Xerox laboratory with Stuart Herbert, and I got to meet him out of an accelerator program for which we ran as participants back in 2021. We were accelerated by the Credit Structural Labs blockchain stream in Toronto, Canada. And out of that program, I got to meet Scott, right? That he's a fellow of that program. And he was also he's also the partner of UN Partners. This is a blockchain-based fund in New York that ultimately led our latest round, right? And so for me, it was an amazing experience to get to know Scott, who was the very first person that minted the blockchain concept out of existence. He's actually mentioned 6 times on the Bitcoin white paper, right?
Yeah.
So he's one of the fundamental stones in bringing up blockchain as we know it. So he was very influential for me. I mean, in other positive ways.
Yeah.
Currently, he's an investor on ucrop.it, so we are very happy to have him.
Incredible. Did he share any pieces of information that you particularly hold on to now?
Well, he was one of the voices, or probably the most relevant voice back then in the early years of our product that says, do not tokenize it. Just build on the timestamp immutability case, and there's a lot of things to fix upon that. And he was right. I mean, we are pretty much building on that concept, and we are doing great, I mean, in doing so. Because if one thing companies want to avoid today is the pain of associating climate metrics to their billion-dollar brands that are not verified to whom, where, how, and when, on a firm level basis, they were created. And more importantly, because they are trying to, in real terms, honor these sustainability farming activities. So they want to have the chance to be able to leverage those positive attributes without the risk inherited of having false claims on when they face their consumers, when they face their investors, when they face the markets. And we are solving that piece for them, right? On a way that is very efficiently in doing so, because we are able to decentralize the whole effort in the farmers' hands themselves. They are the key protagonists of shifting the agricultural climate change challenge from conventional agricultural model into climate smart purified crops, right? So, and one thing I can say that we are different from other startups in the industry is that when others are trying to simulate or model what is happening at the farm level by placing different assumptions and premises on a model, right? But without the farmer involved in the actual things that are being traced at the farm level, they are not actually solving the greenwashing risk or the real impact that farming has for environmental metrics in doing so. But we are, because we are tracing the current facts agreed by farmers and companies at farm level with a grip on how conventional agriculture is shifting to these climate smart crops in a way that you can actually verify that back to the origins on an immutable manner. So that is a very nice blockchain decentralization case right there for an industry that did it, because agriculture is one of the major, more decentralized industries in the world.
Yeah. Diego, we could talk, I think, on hours on end about sustainability and how technology is really enabling this intelligence behind those who are trying to be more sustainable and rewarding them, and this whole incentive-based structure that blockchain technology really offers in the essence of just the truth and trust behind, anything, whether it's crops or whether it's documentation. It's so exciting to learn from you, but I know we're at the top of the episode, and I always want to give our founders and I guess a chance to chat about where we can find them, where we can support. What are your websites? What are your LinkedIn's? What are your Twitters? Where can we be a part of the mission that ucrop.it is moving towards?
Yeah, so you just can, if you want to find us, you just can type www.ucrop.it and you will reach us. Or you can feel free to reach me through my LinkedIn, Diego Hoter, and you will find me. I am pleased to share my experience with anybody.
Amazing. But Diego, thank you so much for being on the show. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and I hope we can continue this conversation. And I'm so excited to see, what will come of ucrop.it in the next year and how it will impact, I think, brands and sustainability overall. So thank you again for being on the show.